The title of the exhibition is Practitioner's Delight, where I would see geometry as the ideal of the pinnacle of rational thinking and so forth. I witnessed this accident once on a construction site where a form broke and the concrete was pouring out over the site, just coming out. And I thought, wow, it was amazing. It's rigid structure, and the concrete goes in and it breaks. It doesn't set yet, and it just breaks out and goes over the landscape. So it just caught me how this geometric structure, more rough but more or less geometric structure, collapses and the material just goes out over the landscape. So I had the idea to make these melt sculptures that replicated, in the sense that experience that I had. The fact that I worked as a construction worker had a huge impact on my work. I mean, my ideas about art and being an artist more were informed by my education and my historical background. I had a good academic base for it, and then this real life experience, and then to jump back to what I call the art and life question, I saw how the two things could play together. And working on these construction sites, you have a lot of downtime, a lot of time to think, and you see things that are just normal to an everyday construction situation. And I said, wow, that's amazing that the way the steel behaves in a way, how it goes together, how concrete starts out as a liquid and is a solid, molds, pouring concrete forms for foundations and so forth. I thought, wait a minute, all these things have enormous metaphoric potential related to sculpture and in a way connected to casting process in really traditional ways of working, but it's in the real world, it's everyday life, it's ordinary life, and I just transferred those over to to procedures, possibilities for art objects. Being a student in the late 50s, early 60s, and seeing the end of modernism, the end of the art object as the embodiment of a higher plane, the artist as seer, prophet, the representative of a more ideal thinking, ideal world, and at the same time, as I was a student at Rutgers, was the Fluxus Happenings, performance art came in very strong, and that involved the idea of art was too isolated, and Capriate, Rauschenberg, and others, that it would be more interesting if more everyday life was included in it. So this was pushing against this pure abstract painting. And we were very much, myself and my colleagues, and not just at my university, but I think around the country, were caught up with that idea of bringing everyday life into a work, and it didn't have to exist as this rare thing that was separated from life. So I just called it the art and life question, and it was very much an issue for us, and I was a little negative on the pretensions of abstract expressionism. I think because the world was changing and we didn't know it at the time, but soon to come was this idea of postmodern. And You know, we were a little bit unsure about science. So the modernism was really optimism and the idea we could do anything. And we were beginning to realize we were maybe destroying the planet. And confidence was really in question at the time. So therefore, I think these artists, deliberately or not, I don't know, began to question this kind of ideal view, and that why don't we have a little of everyday life in work, make it ordinary, so to speak. And we were caught with that idea of using common objects in our work. I think that primary structures, minimalism, established a certain outer perimeter of practice, honest to material, honest to construction techniques, respectful of the logic of building whatever the material happens to be. I'm speaking now mostly about Judd. So these pieces are, I think, aesthetically and philosophically absolutely essential to our world right now. But I think for myself and many of the succeeding generation could see that there was not that much to do with that. So you just digested that limit and would move on. And I think what it established, to go back to abstract expressionism, I didn't like expression that exhausted itself. And on the one side, so this had been played out. I couldn't imagine proceeding in that direction anymore and arriving at anything new. Was certain limits within that aesthetic. And on the other side, there was not room for any new practitioners so what would we do in the middle? So it had an enormous impact, but not in a positive way. It just put up the blocks. There's nothing more to do in this direction. These artists could continue to explore it, but they really owned the territory. So we had to find something else to do, and I think that's where my generation, that got to be called process and material, eccentric abstraction, exploration of materials for ends that were objectively expressive, let's say. You know, it was expressive, but not in this way that traditionally abstract expressionist painting was understood. So that was kind of the jump-off point for me. I used tree branches, modest wood material that I would find here and there, or sometimes I had enough money to buy a big piece of plywood or something, make some pieces from that. But mostly I was finding, using material that cost nothing. I was living on this rented farm until 69, when my first wife and I bought a farm with lots of land outside the city. Yeah, I just found really expressive potential in bales of straw, bundles of wood that were enormous metaphoric potential. So I didn't have any particular romance about nature. So that's like a lot of the thing of constraint, of order and holding things together. So I was thinking along the logic of building, of holding disparate elements together, informed my thinking about it, plus the economics. I couldn't afford it. If I had an unlimited amount of money for material, it might have ruined my whole life. I would be doing all kinds of crazy things that didn't really have any connection to me. In terms of, and I had no real politics connected to it. There was a lot of politics in my background, but I burnt out on politics. But the Alta Povera seemed connected to more a long idea of history and how rich and oppressive the cultural tradition is. So, you could fight against, we didn't have great art as you had here in Italy, which is a positive and a negative. So for young artists, and this played out for the futurists as well. They weren't using material, but they were fed up with this rich tradition, and they said we have to get in the 20th century. And I think that Alta Povera, while the material changed, the thinking and the dissatisfaction and the oppressive aspect of this really rich cultural tradition that you have in Italy informed what the reaction of these artists that said, well, let's give it up with this Carrara marble and these casting traditions, Pietra Santa and all this, and let's get real. Let's be real. It seems like resistance, positive expression, and resistance to tradition. How I got started in Europe was pretty straightforward. There was a magazine, Studio International, I think it was called, a British magazine. They did always large-scale articles. So there was an article, a certain amount of text, but 6 or 8 works were reproduced. And Ricca found this magazine, and a few other gallerists from the Rhineland did as well. And he went to New York. I had a show on the Bianchini Gallery on 57th Street, and he showed up there and said he would like to see some more work, and then possible to go to my studio. But I was living out of the city, about an hour out. And the woman who was the director of the gallery arranged it. He liked the work quite a lot, and I was astonished. He even bought a couple of pieces from me, invited me to come to Europe. He said he would send me a ticket. So I just went there, and I stayed with him. Yeah, that was my first time in Europe. So yeah, then I made some pieces, I had a show, and then he had the idea, this was really important. Any of the galleries did this with, they say the shipping is too expensive, so we invite the artists, we find them a place to work, we buy their materials, they make the show, and it saves a huge amount in costs. So Rick invented this system on my first trip. A few things were sent over, but a lot of things were made in Germany. And then it became the model. The next time I went, I had some ideas what I would do, but then when I got there, I found it really interesting because I would see different possibilities, different materials, different ways of doing things. So I would always drop what I originally intended to do, and I would do something different. After I became comfortable with this, I would just go to Germany and see what happened, stay for a while, and then I stayed longer and longer periods. It was about 1969 when I first started to think about, in a way, what could a drawing be? Let's forget about representation, what could a drawing be? So I got a big stack of paper and be like, you'd make these gestures, what it's comfortable to make a certain shape. And so I did all those things, and I said, okay, what is a drawing? It's the paper's of a certain size. Well, it can't go on beyond that, so I put an edge around it, and then would go back and forth and crash against the edges of the paper, so then it's a trap. Then I would try to make a circle in a piece of paper that was too small for the circle I wanted to make, so it hit the edges. All these plays are very simple, but in most cases they showed that there's no freedom. The idea of free in this concrete way is really a fiction, and there was so much to explore in relation to that, and so much of it that was so deeply psychological, deeply compulsive, like to compulsively doing something, and how expressive that was. I just explored every aspect of it. What's a comfortable meditative gesture? You know, I wrote somewhere in terms of a drawing that's like a meditation. The hand seeks the gesture that's the motion of the universe. And, you know, I like very much the idea of that, or to just do a repetitive thing, which is like a meditation. What I like more than almost anything is authority. I think without thinking that too much, I was in the wedge pieces, I would never bend them up a certain way, said, okay, a little more, a little less. I always set up the situation where the piece could, again, make itself, like the plank pieces that go against the wall. So when I made those pieces, I would take a piece of masonite, so it would lean into the wall. Then I would put another piece against it and make a curve, catch the line, so I had exactly the curve of the deformation of the straight, and then build the piece from that. So it always was exactly how the wood would behave. I like to be able to get out from under something by saying, oh, I didn't make a decision, that's what happened. I would say probably in the late 60s, I happened to be at the Sydney Janus Gallery when the Oldenburg show was being installed. And one of the Formica pieces was damaged. It was a classic Archwager construction made for Oldenburg, and it got damaged. And I was just a kid standing beside the whole thing. I was with George Siegel, and Oldenburg said, you see, that's the trouble with perfection. Something goes wrong and you have to start all over again. I really took this idea very seriously. It wasn't meant for me, it just was, it's really a pain now. We have to fix this piece and do the restoration. So I always got in my mind a casual idea toward the work, that it could be, it's not perfect, it doesn't have to be perfect, it's in the world.